Hello, it's Alistair Curry here from Infrastructure News, and today we're talking to Werner van Rooyen from howtotender.com about tendering in South Africa. Welcome, Werner.
Thank you, Matt. Good day.
Werner, it's a fascinating subject and it's a very complex subject at the same time. Could you expand on where we are at the moment in terms of the history of tendering in South Africa?
Okay. Yes, Alistair. Actually, what happened was in 1994, when they wrote the Constitution, they realized that they will have to include procurement into the Constitution. So it was actually written into the Constitution in paragraph 217. And that bore the Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act, which regulates the whole procurement process in South Africa. Okay, so, and then also with that you get Preferential Procurement Regulations 2017, which is now brand new. That kicked in on the 1st of April. So yes, it all started way back when with the Constitution, like I said, and from there on in there were several other guidelines and regulations that was implemented, so to help organs of state to implement their procurement policies.
Okay, so it sounds very complex and it's becoming even more complex as we go forward. So where does it work in terms of the government tendering process at the moment for consulting engineers?
Look, at this moment, there are, like I said, these regulations that regulate the whole procurement process. So all tenders that goes out for engineers and those people, they will have to be compliant with all these new regulations. Okay.
Okay, so I mean, there are pros and cons. I mean, everyone knows about the pitfalls, but could you expand on that? I mean, is there a good and a bad tender? What does it mean?
Yes, obviously there are good tenders and there are bad tenders, and then there are poorly constructed tenders. That's one of the pitfalls that you've got. You know, you get people. I always say that you must remember that you work with people here. You know, and people can make mistakes. Yes. Okay, so you get poorly constructed tenders, which doesn't clearly say to you what they need. But then also you get good constructed tenders. All right. The other thing about tenders is you must remember that the tender is a tender. Doesn't matter for what industry you have to tender, it is basically the same. There will always be a price in it. There will always be some kind of test of your abilities, you know, and then you have to convince them to make use of your services. Right. All right. So that is always there. The problem with tenders, or one of the bad things about tenders, is that you can get a bad or a poor quality product, all right, because people tend to go in for a low price, and what do they sacrifice? They sacrifice quality. Yes. As well as, especially in the engineering game, I think safety. You know, safety is a big factor when it comes to construction and those things, you know, and that can be compromised as well. So that, and all because they want to have the lowest price, all right. So because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter in what tender environment you find yourself in, price will still be king, and price will still win you, a good price will still win you more tenders than it's going to lose you tenders.
So Werner, for a bad tender, does it start out as a bad tender, or is it the end results that we're talking about here, or is it both?
I think it's a bit of both, but yes, a bad constructed tender is, it starts out like that. You know, so yes, people copy and paste. You know, they don't think it through, and what we tend to find is that, especially like in the engineering environment, is that the engineers will know what the requirements actually is. You know, and then they will see in the tender document that that requirement is not in there. Right. Okay, so they say, but they want X, but you cannot get X before you do this and this. Right, and they just ask for one of those two things. Now, what do you do? So a lot of these people, engineers, ask us in our training sessions, what must we do? And we then say, listen, you will have to help correct them. and the system, because it's also a training task from their side. Okay.
So when things go well, can you give examples? What is a good tender?
A good tender is where it is well constructed, first of all. So the evaluation committee or the bid committee that constructed and put that tender together from the organ of state side or from a private entity, they really put some thought into it, and they defined what they wanted, all right, very correctly. Okay, and they would have used professionals as well to help them, usually quantity surveyors and consulting engineers as well. So then they construct that tender well, all right, and then they put out the tender. They give enough lead time for the companies to respond or businesses to respond, because that's also can be a problem sometimes, or problematic, is that you don't get enough time to respond. Right. You know, they put out a tender on a Friday and want it back on a Monday. So, you know, that's not really fair to businesses. So there's enough response time, and then once the responses come back and the tender document was clearly or defined exactly what they wanted, so that the responders didn't struggle to interpret, then those responders has come back, and then the evaluation is done according to the regulations. Okay, and then the point system is used according to the regulations, and it's put out, and the tender is awarded to the company that scored the most points. So that is a good constructed tender. Okay.
So Werner, if we look at the different types of tender, could you define these within the construction context?
Okay, yes. So basically what happens is you will find that there are a lot of terminology out there. Okay. And in the old days, these, and if I say old days, I've been pre the Constitution, pre-1994, right? So there were definitions for words like tenders, bids, request for quotation, request for proposal, things like that, right? But these days, after 1994, they've done away with all of these things, right? So the different types of tenders are defined only by thresholds. And these thresholds are put out by national treasuries, and organs of state then must apply these thresholds. So you will find that anything under 30,000 Rand, there's no formal tender process for that. Right. All right. And as a matter of fact, in all the legislation that governs the whole tender environment, nowhere do they use the word tender. Okay. They only use the words quotations and bids. Okay. So for a quotation, for something to be, or an offering to be a quotation, it will be then between 30,000 Rand and 200,000 Rand. So if they want to procure goods or services between those margins, then, or thresholds, then they will put out a quotation, or then what you will hear, they talk about a request for quotation. Okay. And then anything above 200,000 Rand is what they call a competitive bid. And those are the only two types of tenders that you actually are supposed to get. Okay. So yes. But for the discussion today, I think it is best that we just use the term tender, not to confuse the people. You know, if we talk about anything above 30,000 Rand.
Yes, but in this context, what does that mean in the landscape at the moment, particularly in terms of things like transformation and procurement, when it comes to these thresholds?
Look, the thresholds, I think, is not really in terms of transformation and things like that. For that, they use the preferential procurement point system. Okay. So each of these tenders, these different types, either should it be a quotation or a bid, is going to be evaluated on the point system, the preference point system. In the slideshow that would be attached, there is a nice calculation or example of how the point system works. All right. But the whole idea behind the preference point system is to give a value to price and a value to your transformation, or BEE as we know it, or triple BEE, right? So the government has decided that they want to put an emphasis on transformation, and they are willing to pay a premium on price if they can advance certain designated groups, all right? So what happens is you get what they call the 80-20 point system and or the 90-10 point system. All right. So in both those cases, the most points are scored for price. Right, so for 80 points for price or 90 points for price, and then the remaining 20 or 10 points is for your transformation or then your BEE score. Okay. So the better your BEE, the better your transformation, the higher you're going to score. So the whole goal is on the 80-20 or the 90-10 system is to achieve 100 points or as close to 100 points as possible with the tender, okay, with your tender response. So you get that. One of the, or let me just say this, that one of the major changes now in the new legislation that was implemented on the 1st of April is that the threshold for the 80-20 system has been increased from R1 million to 50 million rand. So that says to us that the government wants to put more emphasis on the 20 points that you can score and on tenders, on large tenders, because I mean R1 million is not a lot of money these days, but 50 million, that's a lot of money. Right. So for anything under 50 million, they're going to use the 80-20 system, where they're going to put some emphasis on the 20 points that you can score. So the closer you are, then the better you are going to do with your point scoring system. And if you look at the example that we've got, you will see that 20 points doesn't sound like a lot, but I promise you it makes a huge difference. So yes, they are prepared to pay that. So it can happen that the company that has the lowest price don't necessarily win the tender. It's the company, there's maybe another company with a better BE score, and then they can outrank that company with the lowest price.
So this is where we're leading up to. I mean, the new legislation, we're touching on it now. What are the other key elements that the industry needs to be aware of?
All right, with the new legislation, I think the talk of the town is the 30% subcontracting rule. Okay. So what I must just stress here is that there are two instances where they can implement, if I say they, I mean organs of state, can implement this 30% subcontracting rule. And the first one is according to Regulation 4 of the new Preferential Procurement Regulations 2017, where they can make it a pre-qualification criteria. Right? So before they even evaluate you on this 80-20 point system like I just told you now, they can go and look at or require you to subcontract 30% of the value of that tender. And they are going to look at subcontracting arrangements that you will then have to have in place. And that 30% will have to be subcontract to what they call designated sectors. Now, those designated sectors are basically black-owned companies, or then black women-owned companies, black youth, people with disabilities, but it's all 51% or more black-owned companies. All right, so that's basically that. And then on the other scale of it is where they will then make it an objective criteria, the 30% rule. And this is, I think, where the engineering industry is going to fall into, because according to the press releases from government is that they want to target the construction industry for this rule. And there is they say that if it is, and it's Regulation 9 of the new regulations, and they say that if it is feasible for an organ of state to subcontract a contract that is worth more than 30 million rand, then they must subcontract. Okay. So you will find that any construction tender for that matter then, if it is about 30 million rand, they are going to be forced to subcontract 30% of that to these designated groups again, right? Which will be then the black-owned, 51% or more black-owned companies. An interesting thing there, Alistair, is that if you look at the circular that went out to all organs of state of how to implement this rule, yes, is that they said there that the organs of state, they must look out for companies who wants to use their own affiliated companies or subsidiaries and things like that to subcontract, because that's not really the idea. All right. You know, the idea about it is to spread the wealth. I don't know if you know, but the budget for the next 3 years for procurement for government and that's excluding all these other big deals, is 1.5 trillion rand. You know, so it's 500 billion a year, which is a lot of money. Now you can imagine if they can get 30% of that per year to the less fortunate, then you're going to upbring the whole community and the whole landscape. I mean, you're gonna create a new middle class with that. So that's the whole idea behind the 30%. So people are always, they are very negative when they hear about it. But once we explain to them, listen, it's about spreading the wealth. So now you spread the wealth to these companies, they come up, now suddenly they can respond to tenders, they start splitting the 30%, because interestingly enough as well is that it doesn't say there that it is only white-owned companies that have to do the 30%, it's all companies. Okay, so it doesn't matter what your ownership, if you want to tender or respond to a tender to that 30% rule, you have to comply, doesn't matter what your ownership is. So those two are the, like I said, it's a prequalification. Those two are very key. And what needs to be very carefully, you must read your tender document very carefully to understand, is it a pre-qualification criteria where there's no limit on the amount? Okay, so it's just 30%. Or is it a objective criteria at the end where they say any contract above 30 million must 30%? So those are the two major changes, as well as the thresholds that of the 80-20 that was increased from 1 million to 50 million. And then there's a couple of other interesting new things in the regulations as well. One of them is market-related prices. Okay, so they say there that the organ of state must try to negotiate market-related prices. Right. So if you're going to read the instructions to the organs of state that was sent out to them, the circulars, it says there that they must go and do some homework beforehand, before they compile that tender document, so that they know what the pricing is, you know, what a market-related price is. So now in the regulation, I think it is Regulation 11, they give them an option, whereas they do the preference point system, they work out who came in first or second or whatever with the 80-20 or 90-10, and then they can go and look at the price and ask them, but is this price market related? And if it is not market related, they go to that company and say to them, listen, we want to negotiate market related prices. Do you want to do it? Yes or no? If they say no, then they can either cancel the tender, or they can then go to the company that came in second, on the points, and ask them, listen, do you want to give us market-related prices? And then the regulation gives them up till the third tier, or the company that came in third. So that's a very interesting one. It's a backdoor. So yes, they are supposed to pay market-related prices.
Well, it makes it very fair, and it's quite a significant jump on the previous system.
Definitely. The previous system was a bit vague, and there wasn't the market-related prices in there. So now it is in there, and yes, I think it makes it fair. Funnily enough, in the example that we've got here, the company in our example that came in third had the lowest price. So if you apply that rule, then eventually, if the first two companies doesn't want to go down to market-related prices, then eventually they will pay the correct price.
So what I'm understanding is that the tendering process is far more participative now than it was in the past.
Yes, definitely. And, everything that you read into these new regulations points towards the fact that the government officials need to do their homework. They've built in new functionality rules, whereas in the old days, functionality wasn't really part of it. Now it's also defined in the new regulations, and you have to score a number of points for functionality as well. But then they also say in the regulations, not even in a circular, they say that the officials must determine these points, and they must go and have a look and define what is important in the tender. What do they want? What are they looking for? And those criteria needs to score the points.
So Werner, could you define functionality for me, please?
Yes, certainly. Look, functionality is, first and foremost, it is now regulated as well in the new regulations, but functionality is where they test you on whether or not you've got experience. Do you have the people or employees with the necessary skills to do the job? Do you have money to do the job? And then does your product comply with their specifications? You know, so they want to know, do you have the proper services that they require? And they score you on each of these things. All right, so that's the way they test you, and that's how they define functionality. I think the tip here of the day that we need to give to the engineers is that when you look at your tender document, when you open up your tender document, you will have to go to the functionality and see, will you be able to score the minimum points to go through to the next round? All right, so that is very important. But the other one, and that's actually the tip of the day, is that you need to use their headings and subheadings in the functionality when you respond to the tender. So that when that person at the end of that tender in that evaluation committee come and look at your tender response, they need to see this, they recognize their functionality points. You know, because we tend to have our own little template that we've got, and you just copy and paste it into your response, and you don't use their wording. So they don't know where to go and look for that experience. Where did you answer your experience? Where did you answer about the employees? So that is very important, to use their wording or their headings and the exact same phrases and words as they use. And then you will most certainly make it easier for them to identify your functionality and then to score the points. Because it's all about scoring points. I think the whole tender environment, especially from government side, have moved to this point scoring system to make it more transparent, to make it more fair.
Right. But it seems for a lot of contractors, consultants, the complexities of the system might be a deterrent for particularly emerging companies that don't have the in-house skills. How do they overcome this?
Okay, yeah, look, there are, first of all, there are two ways that we can answer this, or there's two thoughts or ideas about this. So the first thing is that if you do not have the skills that are required and you still want to get into this environment, then you can always go and look at some joint venture partnerships, things like that. All right, so that is one of the ways to go. The other thing obviously is that the government from their side, they want to push this by the 30% rule.
Yes.
Okay, you understand? So they want you to get in these guys that don't have the experience, to get the experience with the subcontracting. All right, so that is one way. But the other thing is, on the complexity side, they've also identified certain sub-industries in an industry like the construction industry, where they say, but look, we want to push these young companies or these inexperienced companies, the people that don't have the knowledge, we want to push those business to them as well. So you will find a lot of people ask us, but we're a startup business, we don't have that experience that they ask for. Then we say to them, but listen, you are looking at the wrong tenders. There are tenders out there where they will say that experience is not the end of the world, rather give us something else. Or we want to allocate this tender to a startup new company. Okay.
One of the questions people ask is, I'm working in a very remote area on a road contract. There aren't any small, medium enterprise businesses in the area. How do I overcome this if I want to successfully submit a tender?
Yeah, that is difficult. I think, first of all, with the 30% rule, is that...
Does it always apply? Can you try your utmost, but maybe perhaps in certain instances there's merit in maybe bringing people on board during the process of the contract rather than at the tender stage? Is that feasible?
Yeah, look, I think the whole idea is that it must be before, okay, not during.
Right.
Okay, so what will happen is with the large contracts, the 30% above 30 million, right? there the government or the organ of state that has put out that tender, they must supply you with a list of subcontractors that you can use. Okay, but when it comes to where they do not, with a normal 30%er, then it can be troublesome. But I think if you look hard enough, you will find, because I mean, we've got people coming onto our website asking us, sending us emails, say we want a subcontract, and they are far out, and I mean from places that I've never heard before. So you get it, and there's always a little construction company somewhere there that wants to help, and so I don't think it's going to be that difficult to find, even in the most rural of places. Just on that point, what happens also, you know, there's another little thing that they called also objective criteria, is what they call localization. Okay, where they force you to use people from that certain area. Okay, so that they are also pushing the envelope there, you know. So but the construction people and the engineers, they will be used to that. They know about that. Yeah.
Yes. So within National Treasury, there are new appointments, as I understand it, that are helping to coordinate and improve the process. Could you expand on some of these key positions?
Yes, one of the departments that they've opened up is called the OCPO, or the Office of the Chief Procurement Officer. It's a whole mouthful, but they are basically the watchdogs of tenders. Okay, so they were put in, or that department was put in place to first of all audit the largest contracts that the government awarded, the 100 largest contracts that was awarded during the last year or two, and that, because of that, a lot of these antics that were out there came to the fore.
Could you just give examples?
For example, one of them was these Praza locomotive tenders. Another one was with the correctional services, where they had this tracking of the prisoners, where it was actually a silly mistake by the company that won the tender that they made. But I mean, it's a 380 million rand tender, and you don't want people to make silly mistakes on tenders like that. You know, so they
and these are mistakes that are in the public space.
It is in the public space. It's in the newspapers. You know, so also what they very good at finding out is collusive bidding. They don't want companies to conspire on pricing, fix a price, you know, things like that. So unfortunately, in the construction industry, in the construction engineering world, that is very much an issue.
Historically, it has been.
It has been. We all know about the soccer stadiums for the 2010 World Cup. That all happened there. So yes, but these guys, the Office of the Chief Procurement Officer, they are on the ball. They had a good leader there, a person by the name of Kenneth Brown, but I think his term is going to come to an end now somewhere along the line. And but yes, they go for this. And then also, what the people don't know out there is that there are guidelines that say that tenders over a certain amount must be pre-approved by National Treasury through the Office of the Chief Procurement Officer. At municipalities, they cannot award a tender for more, which amounts is more than 10 million rand before they got the approval from National Treasury. Right. Okay, so yes, there are things in place, and you will find that there's more an openness to this. You know, I know that the Gauteng government, for instance, the provincial government, they've got an open door policy now. They advertise it in the whole Gauteng on billboards, open tender, you know. They want companies to come in and see who won the tender and who came in second. And you will also find that if you ask, why didn't you win the tender? These days, they will openly tell you, listen, the reason is you didn't pass the functionality, or you didn't score enough points on the preference point system, your price was too high, and so forth. So we find that there's definitely a move towards more openness and more transparency in the whole tender process.
Right. Now that's extremely important, and it's also a learning curve if you know why you weren't successful with the tender.
Yes.
What about at the municipal level? Things like the Municipal Finance Acts and municipal infrastructure grants and so on. How is that impacting on a local government level in terms of the tendering environment?
Look, the Municipal Finance Management Act is there to rule the finances of the municipalities. All right. There are also regulations and guidelines. Those, if the municipalities, the municipal managers and the CFOs and those guys, the financial officers of the municipalities, follow those guidelines as they are supposed to, then there will also be a nice tender environment to tender in. Local government, is one of the big spenders. I mean, there are 278 municipalities in South Africa. And every time, like I said, if they want to procure goods or services worth more than 30,000 rand, then they must put out a tender. So there are a lot of municipal work out there, local government work. The problem comes in sometimes that, the councillors, they've got too much say in what is happening with the tender, and that's unfortunate to us, but we have seen that also in larger municipalities like the city of Johannesburg, city of Cape Town, that they are also very transparent, open door policy, so yes, yeah.
And is this process, which we're expanding on here, fast-tracking things? I mean, in the past, companies have tendered, there's been a long delay, and it's gone through to the new financial year, and nothing's happened. So what's changing now in the new process to prevent that?
I don't ever think you will prevent slowness of responding or issuing tenders. Look, there's various reasons why things go slowly. I always say that you must remember we are working with humans. Right. There's a person at the end of the line. Right. So it's up to management to try to increase that the period from the tender has been received or the tender responses have been received to awarding the tender. So what you will find these days in these departments where they want to push this transparency is they will give a timeline in the tender document stating that on this day they will receive the tender document. On that day the bid evaluation committee will start evaluating, and so forth and so forth. And on that day the tender will be awarded and the results will be published on our website.
Right. And that's what we're alluding to here, that as businesses mature they also need to be realistic. I mean, how does South Africa's tendering process compare with some of the other leading or emerging nations in the world?
I think in South Africa it compares very well. We are leaders when it comes to innovative technology. Our SARS e-filing system, when it came out, was the best in the world. So yes, our legislation and our processes compare very good. And we are very transparent to the rest of the world. Unfortunately for the engineers, I've got some bad news for them. If you tender in Europe, you send them a bill for your hours, okay? So, and then they pay you for that, but in South Africa it is on your own time, at your own money. Okay. So in that we lack a bit. It does cost a lot of money to tender, whereas in the rest of the world it is more free. You don't have to buy the tender document, you don't have to spend money on that, whereas in South Africa that is still the case. They are trying to move away from that.
Right. And what about SADC type initiatives, cross-border projects like roads or pipelines? I mean, what advice could you give for people in that respect when it comes to tendering?
Unfortunately, I'm not that clued up with those kind of things. Okay. So, but what I can say is that when they do go cross-border, especially countries like Swaziland, Lesotho, and those guys, they have what they call withholding tax. Okay. And we've seen that companies have burned their fingers with that, where they did not provide for that in their pricing. Okay. So they must just be careful with that. But otherwise, I don't think it differs much from our tender procedures.
Right. So if we go back to the day-to-day construction business, I mean, what's your advice on submitting tenders, and where do I find tenders that are best suited for my business?
All right. So first of all, let's go where to find, and then we will submit. All right. So first of all, tenders are published daily everywhere. Okay. They are advertised in newspapers. They are advertised on websites, and so forth and so forth. But it's very difficult, you know. So what we will suggest is that first and foremost you go to the eTenders website, www.etenders.gov.za. There you will find most of the government tenders. Okay, so that's your first stop. The problem with that website is that you have to do it yourself. It's labor intensive. You have to go click on each page, scroll through, see if there's anything for you today. If there's nothing tomorrow, you will have to come back. And there's approximately 1,600 tenders on that website daily. Right. So that makes it difficult. But there are also tender service providing companies or lead providing companies out there. I'm not going to name names, but I can go and look for them. There are good ones, and obviously there are not such good ones. But we always say to our clients that they must try and at least subscribe to one of these companies. So what they will do is then they search on a daily basis all of these tenders that are available in South Africa, and then if there is something for you today, they will send you an email with that tender. So that is where you find tenders. But like I said, if you really do like to scroll through newspapers, you can do that as well. But that is very time consuming, and professional people like engineers, they don't have time to waste looking through newspapers, finding those tenders. Then when you submit your tender, very important to know is that you have to be on time. Right. It is not because that the procuring entity, whether it's private or public sector, wants to be funny. It is because there can become or there can be a discrepancy when a tender is submitted late. Right. So I mean, nothing stops me from phoning my friend and say, listen, the tenders have been submitted. This is the price. Yeah, now you bring your tender, you know. So that is to stop all those antics. And this is also a tip. What is happening out there with organs of state is that they set their watches to the time that you get when you dial 1026 from a Telkom line. There's a lady counting down the time the whole time in South Africa. So if you go and submit a tender, for instance, at Eskom, you will find that they put it over the public announcement system, and she's counting down the time. And when it's 11 o'clock, they put down the phone, they close the doors, and you're out. So that is very important. But another thing, so you might have to be on time. But when you submit your tender, you have to remember that you have to comply with each and every rule that they state there. If they say that you must write your name on the envelope and your telephone number, you must do it. All right, because they are looking for a reason to disqualify you. Okay, so please obey by all the rules, and the tender document will usually dictate how you have to submit your tender, how many copies. You must be wary of that, because you can be disqualified for that. And then also we say don't go too early, right? Because what can happen is if you submit your tender 2 or 3 days before the actual submission date, then it can happen your tender can be mixed up with other tenders due on that day, and then they open up the tender box, they take out the tenders, they don't look what they're doing, they don't read the envelope, because they just presume all the tenders for that day is for that day. And then they open up your tender, and then they say, oh goodness, but this is only for the 2 days coming, or whenever the case may be, and then they must disqualify you.
Because they've opened it.
Because they've opened it, you know. So and then you sit there and you've already ordered your milk and you know whatever.
Yes, yes.
And your tender is disqualified, you don't even know it.
Yes.
Okay, so that is very important, and we always say follow your tender. So you go on the day of submission, you submit your tender, you stay there and you wait and you look what is happening, because we touched on the Municipal Finance Management Act, and its brother is the Public Finance Management Act. And both those acts state in their regulations that each tender should have a public opening. Okay? But again, we're dealing with humans and people, and they don't necessarily have the time, or they are just too busy, or whatever the case may be, and they do not do a public opening. But it is our responsibility as the responders to those tenders to force those people to remind them, listen here, you need to have a public opening. You need to open up all these tenders, ensure that the safe is empty or the tender box is empty. And so yes, follow your tender, keep up, ensure that the tender is registered in their register, and then you know that you are safe and your tender is in.
And is there some new process that notifies people that their tender has been registered, that it's been received?
No, unfortunately not, but it is dependable on the organ of state. Right, so, but again, the drive is there from the organs of state to be more transparent. So you will find that City of Joburg, yes, you are going to go, you will be able to go to their website, log on their specific page, and you will see who have submitted their tenders. And then eventually they will also tell you who have won the tender. Okay, but no, unfortunately not at that stage.
So Werner, I hear a lot of talk about this central supplier database. Could you expand on this, please?
Yes, certainly. The Central Supplier Database is, again, it's a very nice initiative from the government where they want to centralize the whole gathering of information process. Right. So experienced bidders out there, they will know that for each and every municipality or other organ of state you wanted to respond to a tender, you will have to comply by submitting your tax clearance, your B certificate, financial statements, and so forth, and so forth, and so forth. In reality, there are about 900 government departments. Now, you can think if you want to tender with all of them, you have to put out or give them 900 B certificates, 900 tax clearance. So it was an enormous paper exercise, you know. So the government realized that, and they decided, no, wait, let's centralize this whole thing, and then you'd only have to submit once a year. Right. Okay. So they've launched it actually already on the 1st of September 2015. And then the whole idea was that from the 1st of April 2016, all government departments should utilize the Central Supplier Database to subtract these or get the information for all the bidders, okay, responding to tenders that they put out. So you as a business owner or you as an engineer, you have to go and register on the Central Supplier Database in order to do business with the government. All right. The registration process is a bit of a tedious exercise because you are dependent on a website that there's millions of visitors on each day. So we usually tell the people, be patient, but do go. You have to register first in your own name. You cannot start by registering your business. You first need to register as an individual, and then from there on you can add your businesses because many individuals have more than one business. You know, so you can add all your businesses under one name, and then you load up all your information there. So the idea behind the Central Supplier Database is that once you respond to a tender, they can just get your registration number from the Central Suppliers Database, or the CSD as it's commonly known, and then the government entity just punch that in on their computer and they will get all your information. So no more huge paper drills. Okay, so unfortunately it is not 100% up and running at this stage. The problem is that the government themselves, they didn't realize there were 900 government departments, okay, that have to be on this system.
It's a large number.
It's a large number, you know. So, and the other thing is that all of these departments, they have their own infrastructure, and to make all of those things compatible with one another is taking a bit longer than the government anticipated. So if you find that you still get a government entity or an organ of state that asks you, but listen, you still have to register on our database in order to respond to the standard, you must just do it. Okay. So, but hopefully going forward, that will be the end. Just a final point on the CSD, what I want to make is that people out there, they mustn't get confused with registering on the central supplier database, which is government driven, and then still registering on private sector companies' vendor-based databases. Because we have found that people will then tell the private company, listen, I'm registered on the central supplier database, I'm not going to register with you, what's your story? But remember, the CSD or the center is just for government. Okay, so that is very important to remember.
All right. So Werner, some people have been commenting on the cost of submitting a tender document. It's a small price for many people, but it does add up, and for SMEs, it's still a significant amount, especially when they're not certain that they'll have any chance of winning.
Yes.
What's your view on that?
Yes, look, at the end of the day, the drive from government is to make it free for all right, but we are not there yet. The regulation states that organs of state can charge a reasonable fee for a tender document, all right. But now, reasonable to me is not the same as reasonable to the next person, all right. You will find that the bulk of the tenders out there will be between 150 and 300, maybe as high as 500 Rand to buy the tender document in order to submit the tender. We always tell people, listen, to tender costs money. You cannot tender without money. Unfortunately, there's that belief in South Africa that you can tender without money, you can win a tender without money, you can go and do the job without money. It doesn't work like that. Okay, so, but we've also seen tenders that you had to buy for 50,000 Rand. You know, so what happens now is that organs of state uses that as a leverage to keep out the smaller oaks, you know, to say, no, but we only want competent businesses, so let's make the tender document 2,000 Rand. Now, suddenly, now your SMEs, they are excluded from this because they cannot pay 2,000 Rand for a tender document and then suddenly find out they cannot do what is required in that tender document. So it is a very touchy subject. In our opinion, we must move away from that completely. We think that they are working on that. The whole idea with the e-tender portal, the central supplier database, and the Office of the Chief Procurement Officer, all of those, they want to work together to or supply the tenders for free. All right, so we are working to that, but it's unfortunately taking time, and it is going to take a lot of time to get this message through to all of these government entities and government departments. But yes, it is not a nice subject, and we are constantly asked about that.
Okay, Werner, thanks. The more we've talked, the more complicated it sounds. But there is a way forward, and clearly experts like yourself can provide key advice for all levels and all sizes of companies. So what's your concluding remarks here today?
I think in conclusion, Alistair, thanks, is that the responders, the bidders, they must remember that they must complete the whole document. All right, compliance is everything, so that is very important. You have to tick all the boxes, you have to sign all the documents, you have to initial the whole tender document. You know, people tend to forget those small little things, and it's those small little things that ends up disqualifying you. And you don't know about that. So in conclusion, what we can say is that if you are unsure, you need to get somebody like us, a professional company whose work or whose job it is to look at those things, who are trained in this, who does this on a daily basis. I mean, we complete tenders for companies the whole time, from large construction tenders, road surfacing to cleaning, you know, supplying toilet paper. The range is as broad as this. So we know that in essence all tenders are the same, but it is on those small little things that you get disqualified, and we look for those things, and we are trained to see that.
Fantastic, Werner. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
This has been CPD On Demand, brought to you by Infrastructure News.